Wait, you have a TV?
No. I just like to read the TV guide. Read the TV guide. You don't need a TV. Television addict! Television addict! Television addict!
Hey everybody, Ken Reed here from TV Guidance Counselor. Welcome to a bonus episode of TV Guidance Counselor this week. Your eyes and ears are not deceiving you. This is a 2-episode week. It's a busy time, even though we are in lockdown and a global pandemic. It is still the fall when so many new shows premiere, and as a result, I've gotten the opportunity to talk to more people this week than I normally do. My guest this week is the showrunner and creator of the new show Transplant on NBC that is on Tuesday nights at 10 p.m. Episode 2 just aired this week. Episode 3 will air next week. Joseph K. He is a Canadian writer, producer, showrunner, and this show, we talk about it here, but this show is a Canadian NBC co-production, takes place in Canada, and is great. I really enjoyed it. I watched the first 3 episodes. I got to watch them before you do because I'm me and I'm special. But it's a really cool show. I'm a sucker for a medical drama, and it's very well done, and I think you'll enjoy it. It's fun. And after you hear Joseph talk about it, you'll absolutely want to check it out because he's really smart, fun, well viewed. I guess that's what you'd say of someone who's watched a lot of TV. I've never heard that before, but I guess that'd be the television version of well read. He's well viewed. And I had a great time talking to him. So you'll enjoy this. Watch Transplant. You can watch it probably, I think, on Hulu does the NBC shows, but I'll put a link up if you miss it at the time that it's on, but you can set your DVRs, or I'm sure it's on demand. I don't know how television works now, but you can find it. It's easy to find. And I hope your summer ended well. It's weird. Everything's weird, but that's okay. Stuff is still going on. So anyway, and I hope you like this week's earlier episode with Kevin Murphy from MST3K. So hopefully you didn't miss that one. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy this week's episode of TV Guidance Counselor with my guest, Joseph K.
TV is my friend, and it has been always there for me in time of need.
Joseph K, how are you?
Pretty good. How are you, Ken?
Good. Thank you so much for doing this. Are you in Canada now?
Toronto.
Oh, you are in Toronto. Okay. I wondered if you went to LA to do the show at all, or if you were still there.
So we filmed the show in Canada, in Montreal, and I would love to be in LA right now because we're doing press and it's going to be a Paley Fest and stuff, but I can't cross the border. So
yeah. You're not missing much down here. It's kind of a hell on earth. But it was fascinating. So we'll get to the guide in a minute here, but that leads me to my first question about the show is, we clearly have had shows in the States that have been co-productions between US and Canada. Due South is one that comes to mind. We have a lot of shows that are set in America that are shot in Canada. But NBC, and it takes place in Canada, and I was kind of surprised.
Yeah, it's a show that I conceived in Canada and pitched in like early 2017 to a Canadian network, and I was developing it there. And then about 6 months after I developed there and wrote the pilot, we also pitched it to NBC Universal International, and they came on as a studio. And so we've been developing the show like inside and then making the show inside the NBC family now for, 3 years.
So that's unusual. I can't think of another example of that.
Yeah, I don't think there is. There's other like acquisitions, but be inside the family. And interestingly enough, I was never asked by NBC to change the setting from Toronto or even to hide it. They never cared. Even
in the opening scene of the pilot, I don't even think they do pilots anymore. So the first episode, when there's a truck, and I won't ruin it for people, though it did air already. The truck comes in, and there's a truck, and it has a Quebec license plate.
It's Ontario.
Yeah, and me being the jerk continuity person, I was like, they shot it in Canada, didn't even got through, and then I realized.
Well, first of all, it's amazing that you noticed that you even noticed the license plate. Good for you. But yeah, no, it's an Easter egg, I guess, for confused American audiences.
Yeah. I watch a lot of TV, and I know people who do shows, and they're all in Vancouver and stuff shooting, so I'm always on the lookout for that kind of thing. So the issue here we looked at was June 20th to the 26th, 1998. X-Files on the cover. I don't know if you were an X-Files fan.
Huge.
Okay. So this is 98. You were a lawyer before you started doing TV,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I was. I was at law school in 1998.
Okay. So you weren't even thinking about getting into TV, but you're watching X-Files.
Exactly. Yeah, it was such a trip to think. I mean, I actually will from time to time watch the X-Files. It's on Netflix, and I'll just occasionally have a fix for it, and it's still so good. And then I was reading that article there's an article in there about Chris Carter, and you think about like, well, A, the X-Files is amazing, but B, the sort of TV that flowed from there, and you think about like Vince and everything, and it's sort of the fastidiousness of Chris Carter in that, because I worked on this briefly. I worked on this show called Ransom. So it had been created by this guy Frank Spotnitz, who had come up through X-Files as well, and he talks about the Chris Carter like style of story breaking and with the extreme amount of detail. And it's just interesting to me, like that's all kind of passed forward, and that started there, and the show is still pretty cool.
Yeah, it's funny when I, as sort of a nerd for this sort of stuff, I always say this is kind of like my baseball, where I'm like, oh, they worked under them, and then they switched that to. But there's a few shows that really, if you look at the writing staff and the people that went on to showrun from them, those shows just were like the seed that had every show we've had. Like Roseanne is a big one where you had, Joss Whedon, Judd Apatow, Dan Harmon came out of that thing. X-Files is another one. It's just insane how they sort of apprenticed on these shows.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And the methodical style of, they all say like they were taught to write everything down on the cue cards, on the cards in the story room, like in excruciating detail. And that's how they broke those episodes, just really in a really involved way. And then if you watch Breaking Bad and you read about how they write Better Call Saul, they still do that. And yet those shows also feel really spontaneous somehow. And I don't know, it sounds like the best school of television making of all time, the X-Files. Plus it went on for so long, just such a long time, and it continued to be good. If you pick like, I don't know if you do this, if you still watch it, but if you pick like a random episode from season 1 million or whatever, there might be some weak ones, but there's also just always great ones.
Yeah, they're also doing 22 episodes a year, like in the old format, and their hitting average was pretty high.
Pretty high, yeah, pretty high. Yeah.
They're also one of the shows that I think everyone's used to serialized storytelling on television now, which is, was the stuff of soap operas until 20 years ago. And X-Files was one of the ones that would have mythology episodes and Monster of the Week. And with Transplant, I noticed you have that balance as well, because you do have a sort of mythology going or a running storyline. And that's hard to juggle, I imagine.
Yeah, it's hard to juggle, but it's really fun because we always knew, like I always knew Transplant was an immigration story and a medical drama hybrid. And the medical drama is something that we're so familiar with. It's just like comfort food, it's a warm blanket. And so if you're pitching that show, people are making that show, you have to make that show. And it's fun to make that show, don't get me wrong. Like, it's fun to do that, but the other stuff is kind of more exciting, how to tell the story of this guy's past, or how to tell the story of the main character's trauma or integration into a new country. Yeah, so it's like what you do is you find ways to just gently weave it in when people aren't even really sure that you are weaving it in, right. and it's fun. It's an interesting balance, though. You're right. And we would try to do it in stealth ways.
Because it's not that the X-Files was sophisticated, but they did it very bipolar in that it would be either it's a mythology or it's not a continuity episode. And we're more sophisticated now, and your show does it great where, you don't have an A and a B story. You have an A, B, and a C, and the C is running through the whole time. And that's grown out of things like this.
It has. It's funny with the X-Files. Like I admit, I consider myself a relatively intelligent person, but I never understood the mythology episodes, couldn't track them, could not follow them.
Yeah.
And movies, I would always be there on opening night to see those movies, but I don't know what was happening.
I don't know if they did either. Like, talking to people who worked on that show, they were kind of making it up as they went along a lot of the times, which is evident. I think that's when I checked out a little bit, because I was like, they didn't have a plan. And I think people are a little more savvy now. Although I had a Fringe was one of my favorite shows the last few years, which I don't know if you watched.
I watched a little bit. I never really got hugely into it.
It got very good. The problem with that show was they had a 5-year plan. Yeah. And so they had a very deliberate pace, but then the show got really low ratings. And so they were like, you better start pulling out the stops. So they had to compress like 3 years of the 5-year plan in like half a year. And it was like, yeah, I guess it could backfire going the other way too, if you're too slowly revealing the backstory. Yeah. But you bring up an interesting point about the medical drama and how that is like a warm blanket. And, especially doing this show, when I look at decades of television, the medical drama is maybe the only genre, and I could argue sitcoms maybe, that we literally never are without a medical drama on TV since the 40s. Like it is a stalwart, detective shows are close, but we have ups and downs, Westerns went away, and the medical drama always. Yeah. Yeah. Did you watch medical dramas when you were growing up, or why were you drawn to that specifically?
Yeah. I mean, pre-ER, ER is the beginning, middle, and the end of the medical drama for me. And that's like pre that a little bit. Like I remember watching St. Elsewhere, and I remember being into I would watch MASH with my dad, and that's essentially a medical drama. So yes, but not really until ER. And then I remember just being like all of us who were watching TV at that time, just floored by that show. And, it's in that issue of the TV Guide, it's like Clooney's leaving the show that year, which I thought was really interesting. And so certainly ER. And I went back when after I'd sold Transplant and we were starting to write it, and I had all the writers watch the first 3 seasons of ER. That was, on the plate because it's really, again, like a clinic, of how to write just in general, like whether you're writing a medical drama. It's such an efficient and exciting and emotional show. It just does everything so well. So really, and after that, I'm a fan. Like I'm a fan. I mean, after ER, I watched a lot of Grey's Anatomy, I will admit. And
nothing wrong with it. It's fine.
No, it's effective, man. Like, and right now, I think it's a bit of a renaissance time. Like I'm a big fan of The Good Doctor as well, because I think that I watch that show really closely because there aren't a lot of medical shows that are organized around a dominant point of view. And The Good Doctor is, and I think they do a really good job of retelling that story again and again in emotional ways. And I think New Amsterdam is good because it has a soul, like socially conscious in a way that was, I think, ahead of the curve when it premiered a couple years ago. And I haven't seen a lot of Chicago Med, but I think it is still you're right. It's so fertile. I mean, I think networks always want stakes, and life and death in every scene, the stakes are right there. So I think it will never go away.
I've also noticed that sort of post ER, and I can't think of examples before this, but medical shows have also taken over the role of the whodunit and the mystery. But at this time, it's just like, we have a mystery illness, we have to figure it out, instead of who killed them. It's like, who's killing this? Where, like detective shows have become all procedural. There kind of is no mystery. It's just like, we want to see how you do it. And the medical drama sort of come in and filled that hole. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's so right. And I think when they figured out with House that you could make a medical show into a mystery in that way, you could reinvent the form. You're right. You can't really reinvent the cop form. I know it's kind of really topical now because they want to reinvent the cop form.
Yeah.
How are they going to? That was the thing with Transplant, is that we were able to once again just slightly like reinvent the form by coming at it from a new perspective. And it makes me think of that. I think it's some point on Seinfeld, somebody says it'll be years before they find another place to hide cheese in a pizza.
Yeah, exactly. In the crust.
Yeah. But that's kind of what it feels like. I mean, with cop show, how do you do that? How do you generally? I don't know. I really don't know. But with medical, there's specializations. You make it into a mystery. You always have the soap, and it's
The angle that I liked too in the first 3 episodes of Transplant that I watched was, and this may be a totally wrong interpretation, but the villain seems to be bureaucracy. Where it's the immigration, it's the by the book stuff, but it's not in a way that it's like, I don't play by the rules kind of thing. It's that this guy's really trying to do everything correctly, but the rules and the bureaucracy are almost just so rigid that it's inhuman.
Yeah, I think that's totally right. He's got he's a little bit of a fly by the seat of his pants personality, and also because he came up as a doctor in a sort of country where he had to make it up as he went along. That's his skill set. But he encounters sort of like the bureaucracy is the adversary in two ways. One, he doesn't know how to be in this hospital because it's different. And then two, because he's fighting a bureaucracy back home too. Like he still is like, he can't get his credentials. So he's still kind of caught between a bureaucracy that he fled and a bureaucracy that he arrived in, and both of them seem alien to him in a way.
Yeah, or like the HR lady, or like the social worker who, you know, they're not like a traditional, mustache twirling villain, but they are roadblocks.
Roadblocks is a great way of putting it. Yeah. We didn't want to write bad guys. We didn't want to write one big, scary, mean doctor who was going to yell at everybody. We wanted to have it be, like a little bit more real. Yeah.
Are you a horror movie fan? Because this show gets pretty gory.
Yes, I'm a horror movie fan. I think we aren't afraid to go to the blood, and I don't mind people watching like this, with their hands, since we're an audio medium here, with their hands over their faces. I don't mind. I think it's one of the first director that we used on the show, who was a veteran of Chicago Med, said, it's just part of the thing. It's like, there's got to be laughs in a comedy. There's got to be blood. and you got to do it right. And if there isn't some gore, they just don't think they got what they came for, so. Yeah.
It's like a little, like I always picture some people would be like, I'd never watch a horror movie. And then they're like, oh, medical drama. Yeah.
Yeah.
like I thought, I don't know. Did you see the Equalizer movies, the Denzel Washington?
Yeah.
I loved him too, but especially the first one, the whole last 20 minutes is a Friday the 13th movie.
Yeah.
He's literally in a Home Depot murdering like 200 guys with every appliance on earth. But no one would ever equate those things. But I'm like, this is literally a slasher movie.
Totally true. Totally.
So it's all sort of Trojan horses.
It's Trojan horses, yeah.
And also, I didn't think they said it in the article here, but have you heard the story of how Clooney left ER? Like how he kind of got discovered?
No, maybe, but if I have, I can't remember.
So Steven Spielberg, he directed the live episode, I think, when they did that live episode. Mm-hmm. And he was totally unfamiliar with the show and totally unfamiliar with Clooney, but he was friends with Crichton from, I think, Jurassic Park. Right. And he just fell in love with George Clooney and was like, this guy's a movie star. And then it was Spielberg, so he's like, no, yeah, because I'm Spielberg, now he's a movie star. He's like the only person who could make that happen. And it's such a weird thing because he'd been around for decades and he was in like 6 sitcoms before that. Yeah. And people kind of forget because he just seems like a movie star, like he's always been.
For sure. Well, when we were watching it, I think it's in the second season, but it might be in the third season. Doug he gets strapped in his car somewhere and a water main breaks, and then he has to go rescue some kid who's trapped in the water main, and then all of a sudden they're on a chopper and doing procedure on the kid in the chopper, and it is an action movie. Like they must have spent, in 1997 dollars. I don't know how much they spent. It's so well done, and we were watching it thinking, yeah, this at some point somebody was like, maybe his management, I don't know, but somebody was decided that Clooney was an action hero. He was going to be Batman or whatever, and this needed to feature it because it's like they did it deliberately.
Speaking of Batman, I also got vibes, especially in the first episode, of a secret identity. Like it had superhero vibes. It sort of dissolves as you go on, not in a bad way, but in that first episode, it was like I'm a medical superhero. Like I have a secret identity.
Yeah, that's bang. I love that. That's bang on. When I was pitching the show. So it was 2017, 2016. Like I would go around and I would say, hey, like we have perfected the anti-hero, like post Don Draper, post whatever. This guy, I think he can be iconic. This guy's a hero. He's not an anti-hero. And I would say, he's Indiana Jones meets Alexander Hamilton, from the play. And so that's what I would say, because I'd say he's a superhero. And so let's give you the mystery of the backstory of the superhero. He's got a scar. You don't know what the scar is. He's, I love that stuff, the tease at the mythology a little bit. And, it's what you don't show and what you don't tell. And then every superhero is damaged and broken, and he says in the second episode, he talks about the death of his parents, because so many superheroes are constantly basically just trying to avenge or move beyond the death of his parents. And it's archetypal. So
I just as a lifelong comic book fan, sometimes I'm like, man, if they were just better about making sure accidents didn't happen and everyone got free therapy, this universe would have no heroes or villains.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
Maybe that's true in Canada. I have never been. I don't know. So when you went through the guide here, I don't know if you went through night by night, but did anything else jump out at you? Like on Saturday night, anything jump out you'd watch?
Yeah, well, I thought a couple things jumped out at me. I like, it feels like a transitional time in television, because Seinfeld is ending, it's going off the air. Clooney is leaving ER. Larry Sanders is ending. There's actually an ad in here for Sex and the City, like promoting it as the beginning.
Yep.
And, just going back to what you said before about, X-Files being sort of an early adopter of narrative television, it feels like the Sopranos isn't far away, and so it feels like it's a very pivotal, like little fulcrum-y time. It kind of jumped out at me, like this pre-Sex and the City, and Larry Sanders had ended, and I don't think a lot of people appreciated how good that was at the time.
HBO, cult isn't the right word, but HBO wasn't as mainstream a network of producing original series until kind of the tail end of Larry Sanders. So like they had done Tales from the Crypt. They did a show called Dream On.
Yeah.
They did a show called First and 10 with O.J. Simpson in the 80s and Delta Burke. But it was really after Larry Sanders ended, they started like people who didn't normally talk about HBO seemed to be paying attention. Mr. Show, that was also on around the same time. But Sex and the City was the first time I remember, like, not that, I don't even know how to explain it. Not like abnormal people watch HBO, but like it became all of a sudden more ubiquitous somehow with that show. And then The Sopranos. So then it became like regular television all of a sudden.
Yeah. It did. And so there's something about this era, like, well, Larry Sanders was popular with critics and with intelligentsia, but not really with the mainstream. Mr. Show, nobody knew who that was, or what that was really. And then just around the corner is almost like, in a way, kind of like the death of this TV guide era, in a way,
Yeah.
Like it's so, the sort of, just, it's just really, really interesting. And you see like Seinfeld going off the air at the tail end of that. And I'm not sure what the through line is between Seinfeld and Sopranos, or if there is one, but
well, New York. But I think it shows sort of the death of the traditional network power structure where you had the big three, because in the 2 or 3 years, at least in America, you had before 98 here, you had UPN and CW start to rise, which sort of took some of that away, and a pay cable network becoming a legitimate contender with original programming, which, 5 years before that would have been crazy. Yeah. Did you get that stuff up in Canada? Did it air on a network, or did you have to have
So we had this station called the Movie Network, TMN, and I remember watching Dream On and Arliss.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I guess, was that the mid 90s, I guess. And then eventually Sex and the City. I remember The Sopranos. I was still in law school, and I was actually in New York. Went to law school in Toronto, but I was in New York with some friends, and I remember them telling me about The Sopranos. It was like into the second season. So I don't think it wasn't like I see in Canada in the first season, but around the second season, people started talking about it.
It's always fascinating to me. There's more crossover between US and Canada, obviously, because we're right there, but what shows we really export and what we don't. And it's almost never comedies.
Yeah.
Because that doesn't translate. Either way, really. Although I love a show like Twitch City. I don't know if you watch
Yeah.
that I've been shouting about that show from the rooftop since like the 90s, but it's so Canadian.
Yeah, it's very Canadian. Yeah. Twitch City, Schitt's Creek is exporting, I guess because of Eugene and Catherine. Slings and Arrows, which isn't a comedy, but is funny, exported. Canadians would export sketch comedy. With
Kids in the Hall.
SCTV.
SCTV is my favorite everything.
It's pretty great.
That blew my mind as a kid. And like those of us because here you had to either have Cinemax, which no one really did when it aired there, or you would like get it on a weird cable channel through the airwaves, and sometimes you get it out. So like those of us who were into SCTV, it was like a weird little club.
I bet. Wait, was it SCTV that was briefly on NBC, or am I totally?
No, you're not wrong at all. SCTV had 4 cycles, and stop me if this is super boring, but in the 70s when it was originally on, I think, CBC, they were half-hour shows, and that's when like Harold Ramis was on it, and then it ended, and it was done for 2 years, and then when Lorne Michaels left SNL in 1980, NBC said, we're going to replace this with SCTV, but we need to sort of softly introduce it. So they got everyone back and they did what they called SCTV Network 90. So on Friday nights, it was on in the SNL slot at 11:30 in a 90-minute format. And then they literally offered them to take over SNL. The whole cast, they were like, just walk right in. And they were like, no way. Catherine O'Hara did say yes. And she never made it to an episode because it was such a horrible environment.
Crazy.
Michael O'Donoghue was particularly like just awful to her, which I'm like, how can you be awful to Catherine O'Hara of all people? And then it moved to a joint production between Cinemax in the US and Super Channel. They did the Cinemax ones where the cast was just 4 of them. It was Martin Short, Eugene Levy, Andrea Martin, and Flaherty. That's the other one. Yeah. Yeah. So like sometimes Dave Thomas would come back or Catherine O'Hara would do one episode, but it was just those 4. And that's when it got real weird. Like they did a whole episode, like an hour-long parody mashup of Das Boot and Porky's called Das Booty. And it's an hour. Like who would do that?
That's crazy. That's totally crazy.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, I guess it was probably the whole time I watched it in the 80s, it was probably just on the same Canadian channel. So I don't even remember any of that other than Johnny LeRue and Arpeggio and all that stuff.
Johnny LeRue is the best.
And now, like, I don't know if this happens in the US, but in Canada on film sets, there's a lot of Johnny LeRue. Like people getting angrily asking for crane shots and
street beef. One camera. One microphone. I found out, talking to Scott Thompson, that Buddy Cole started from Johnny LeRue.
Really?
Because Scott was in the touring cast of Second City.
Okay.
And at the time, Second SCTV became popular. So what they said was, you're just going to do characters from SCTV. And they made him play Johnny LeRue. And he got so mad that he played him just super flamboyantly gay and he got fired, but he was like, now that's Buddy Cole.
Amazing.
Which makes sense now that I know that.
It kind of makes sense.
But that's just the best.
Were you into Kids in the Hall too?
Oh yeah, I loved Kids in the Hall. I saw nothing like that before that.
Yeah, it was so off the wall. And I guess I was gonna say and since, but no, I guess not. I guess they've spawned. I guess they're kind of they're alt comedy grandfathers, I guess. Yeah, sort of. Although I've never really seen anything like it since, in a lot of ways. Is there a line between Kids in the Hall and Mr. Show? I mean, sort of. But I think they both are children of Monty Python in a weird way. Right. But just filtered through guys that have done. Although, I mean, Lorne Michaels has his hand in both. As either the Svengali or the abusive father, however you want to look at it. Well, there's the connective tissue that would sometimes happen in the episodes of both shows. That, in addition to the wild shit, that is pretty remarkable. And it's so weird how almost, I think all the Kids in the Hall have been on mainstream sitcoms in the U.S. for years in some capacity. I think just Kevin McDonald. I feel like that's true. Low profile. Like last I read about him, he was living in Winnipeg and married to someone with a regular job, and just, you see him sometimes doing guest spots on things, but mostly low profile.
I did some shows with him, and yeah, he lives. Winnipeg's fairly rural, right?
Yeah, it's like middle of the country. It's like Omaha.
Yeah, because he was like, I'm in the middle of nowhere. There's nothing there. I have to do this thing. Anything else on Saturday, or did anything on Sunday pop out at you?
I actually didn't I just read the articles. I didn't really flip too much through.
You went Playboy style, just the articles.
I went Playboy style. Yeah. Yeah.
But the articles are great. I sort of miss television journalism like this.
I remember, you were probably the same. I'm guessing that the TV Guide would come and I would just read the whole thing cover to cover. Like I would soak it up. I wanted to know everything that was coming, going, or what was on. I read it, devoured it.
And the criticism was really good. It wasn't just like thumbs up, thumbs down. It was like, here's some interesting things to think about.
Yeah. Whereas now this has been swallowed by a million of the same little feature pieces. There's a couple places where you go and get great TV coverage online, I guess, but there are lots of places, but it was all here,
right.
And it's not all here anymore.
Yeah, it was kind of curated for you in one package, which was kind of nice. Is there anything that you have been watching in lockdown, like as a comfort show?
The comfort show right now for me is Ted Lasso. Jason Sudeikis plays an American college football coach who goes to England to be the coach of like a kind of shitty soccer team. I guess it's like basically the premise of it is essentially this plot of Major League.
Okay.
Then you learn that he's been hired to tank the team. Like it's the widow or no, the spurned wife of the guy who owns the club, who's a jerk, and she wants to ruin the team. So to ruin the team, she's hired this college football coach doesn't know what he's talking about, but it's Bill Lawrence,
It's Scrubs and
it's like full. I say it's comfort food because it's during the pandemic. Because Sudeikis' character is unbelievably positive. He's like Leslie Knope meets Coach Taylor, and he just it's not grating. Like he's just a warm and enthusiastic guy, and he really wants to do a good job. And it's the best thing it's the best thing I think he's ever done. And it's a really conventional show. Like there's nothing groundbreaking about it, but it's good. And it's just kind of with everything going on in the world, I caught up in one day or whatever.
Yeah, and I don't know if part of this is because of everything going on in the world or just because we're on the cycle of what's popular has come back around, but we've spent, to your point, so many decades now with anti-heroes, and then especially in comedies, like just bad people.
Yeah.
And it's nice to see shows where it's just like somebody really positive, or it's still funny, but it doesn't have to be like the worst possible things happening to everybody all the time.
Yeah, I think we need a little bit of positive. We need a little bit of healthy positivity, a little bit of optimism to trade against. Watch the news for 2 seconds, whatever country you're in, and it's pretty bleak. So yeah, and I don't know what else is out there right now that it feels like a bomb, like a BALM bomb.
Yeah.
Is there what is it? Is there comfort food?
I've been going back to a lot of old shows. Like I have some stalwarts like Newhart and Barney Miller and those kind of shows, which are always very comforting. I actually discovered a Canadian show called Still Standing.
Yeah.
Which didn't really make it down here, but is on like Amazon Prime or something. And I've talked about it on the show before, but it's very positive. And it's exploring these sort of Rust Belt Canadian towns. And as a stand-up, I hate stand-up specials. Like I hate them because to me, it's like watching a show about a restaurant versus eating at the restaurant. Like for stand-up, you got to eat at the restaurant.
You don't like the craft of it though? Like I guess if you stand up, like sometimes you must study the craft of it.
Yeah, but there's like one layer too many between you and the show. Whereas I love things that present stand-up while incorporating the fact that it's on TV.
Right.
So it's not just, we just throw a camera in here and show the show. Like it gives you something more, and it gives you something more with the format. And so like Still Standing is a perfect example.
Did you like Crashing?
I did. And I know Pete, who's from here actually too. But at the same time, I get very, sometimes I'm like, do normal people care about this? because I'm so used to it, or like The Big Sick, which I loved. And I know Camille and Emily, and it's funny because the Montreal Comedy Festival auditions that are fictionalized in that, I was on those with Camille. That's where I met Camille.
Oh yeah.
So it's super weird. And I'm like, there are people who weren't on this show watching this.
Yeah.
So it's hard to like civilian watch it,
Yeah. What's that movie with Mike Birbiglia about the comedy troupe where
oh yes, that from last year that he directed it, I think.
It's like Keegan Michael Key, I think.
Yeah.
It's kind of about that. It's kind of about like you come from that world and then the people in that world make stuff and you have mixed feelings about it just because, hey, I know you, man. Like I know that's not who you are or whatever,
It's weird. I'm usually pretty able to like separate myself when people make fictional things.
Yeah.
And I can get lost in them. But yeah, sometimes like it's hard to watch stand up too when it's like, oh, I was there for that. That's not what happened.
As a non-comedian, I thought Crashing was really good. I found it moving. Like I found as a non-comedian who is fascinated by comedians, but I thought he did a good job of like, I cared and I felt for him and he wasn't afraid to make himself look bad, which I thought was admirable. He was playing himself.
He did a nice balance of it not being farcical disaster, which, in the Seinfeld kind of Curb Your Enthusiasm way, and not being so like self-mythologizing, self-aggrandizing, which is, which apparently is hard to do given a lot of the stuff I see people make.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, like he wasn't afraid. Most of the time when he did comedy on the show, it wasn't funny, and he wasn't afraid to be playing himself and not being funny on stage. Sometimes it was really funny on stage, but I thought that seemed brave to me.
But that's really accurate. Like, that's the thing I always say. Like when new comics ask me about comedy, which I always say, I feel so sorry for them for asking me. But the two things I say is get Stephen King's Dance Macabre, which is his book about horror fiction, which you will read and understand that horror and comedy are exactly the same structure, different payoff. And for some reason, it's easier to understand that when it's presented as horror and you go, oh, I get it now. And the other thing I tell them is the greatest thing about stand-up is you do it and it's gone.
Yeah.
And so the only people that saw it are here. And unless you were exceptionally bad or exceptionally good, they're probably not going to remember much of it.
Interesting.
Which to me is great. Like that's freeing.
Yeah.
But I've had people be like, that's horrible. I'm like, no, it's awesome.
That sounds amazing to me because you need the freedom, like as a drama writer, we're just always looking for the freedom to try and fail. Because if you don't try and fail, then you're not learning and you're not getting better. And that's the same whether you're writing episode 7 of a network series that's on the air or whether you're working on your spec. I mean, like, you need an audience to know,
Yeah. You have to know what works and what doesn't, and then why it didn't or it did.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you find that when you're writing a drama, it gets, to the point of like, oh, we need some positivity, or do you feel like you have to inject some stuff sometimes where you're like, oh, this is too heavy?
It depends on the thing. I think there needs to be heart, like, so as long as there's something to care about, as long as you can invest in if there's somewhere to put your heart, then I think it's okay. It doesn't have to be sweet. It doesn't have to be, it can be a whole range of tones, but there needs to be some kind of heart. That's funny that you said that about Stephen King's. I will always tell people to read on writing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which I love too. Have you read Dance Macabre?
No, I haven't.
Oh man, it's he taught a horror fiction class at University of Maine, I think in 1980, and he basically took his class and made it into this book. And it's got less autobiographical stuff than on writing, although there is a good amount of it in there. But he just breaks stuff down. He's like, context. And he talks about the clown at midnight thing where, a clown at the circus is funny. On your lawn at midnight is scary. It's like, while also being really charming and easy to read, and he's like reviewing movies, but you're like kind of learning and you don't even know.
Yeah. Well, that's what it's like for on writing. He's like telling you how to be professional. He's telling you the very basics of craft, that's not, nobody teaches that sort of thing, especially now, and
yeah. That's the try and fail thing. Like he's done it for you.
Yeah.
And a lot of cocaine. which he freely admits now. I'm like, oh, this book has The Shop in it? I know when he wrote this.
Hey, did you like The Outsider?
I did. It didn't feel very Kingish.
Yeah.
Which isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah.
And Jason Bateman's just, I mean, he's still, you're instantly engaged in whatever he's doing. Did you like it?
I loved the first 4 or 5. And then I felt like they were treading water and the end was a bit rushed. I loved like a lot of it though. Like I feel like sometimes it was like, it would have been a great 6 episode series and they stretched it out a bit, but it was fun.
I find that a lot with like a lot of the Netflix series or the streaming series where they like, not all series have to be the same amount of episodes, but they haven't really gotten comfortable with that yet. So they're like, oh, we're okay with being 13. That's new. But there are definitely shows where I'm like, episodes 6 through 9, guys. No, we didn't need them. They weren't bad. We just didn't need them. And I'm hoping they kind of get there. I loved Castle Rock. Did you see that?
I haven't seen Castle Rock. I've never watched.
Castle Rock is amazing in that it is the most Stephen King thing I've seen, but isn't based explicitly on anything he's done.
Really?
It's someone just taken that universe and just nailed it.
That's the thing that I loved about Watchmen. I don't know if you liked Watchmen.
I loved Watchmen.
That was like, I've watched it twice. Like I can't, having seen a million adaptations, that they were able to capture the spirit of something so unique it's just great. It's just mind blowing. I
always, the thing, I've been growing up, as I said before, like a huge comic book guy my whole life. One of the things that made Watchmen the comic perfect was that it was the greatest example of what that format can do. Like it was unique to comics. The way the way that story works with words and pictures and like ephemera and backstory and the way you can introduce stuff was unique to comics. Yeah. And so what I think the movie missed was they used the comics as storyboards and you had to translate it. You can't, it's tied to that format. But what the TV show did was translate it. Yeah. They got the exact spirit and the reasons why it was great and made it into something unique to the format of television. And it was perfect.
Perfect. And it's the book is so batshit, so uniquely batshit. But then to think about the elephant, she's hooked up to the elephant.
Yes.
Yeah, or everything that's going on with Jeremy Irons.
Yes, just in general all the time anyway. But he's perfect in that role. And like one of the things the movie really missed for me was when they changed the ending. Yeah. The reason being that it's supposed to be ridiculous that it's a giant octopus. And when you make it Dr. Manhattan, the whole point is he's the only superpowered character and is a U.S. asset. That's going to make everyone against the U.S., not unite the world. Like, that's the whole point. But I imagine it's really difficult. And you worked on other people's shows before, but sort of playing in someone else's world with their characters has to be tough.
Yeah, it is tough. I actually think it's a skill set. Like you come across really great, unique writers who are amazing, who have great work in them that you've read or seen. And then when they get into somebody else's playground, they just don't want to be there. Like they need to burst free. And depending on what you're working on, you're not supposed to burst free. Like you're supposed to do what the show is or get out. So, and I've seen that with amazing writers, and I find that like the writers who can exist in that system are the ones who find a way to have fun within the parameters that are set out for you. It's like they say, a dog is happier if it knows the rules, or a child is happier if it knows the rules. And of course, writing is meant to break rules. There's no doubt about that. Like we're supposed to push ourselves, and we do. But if you can't have fun in that, in that context, then you shouldn't be doing it. Then you should just be, you shouldn't be writing in that situation. But I personally like it a lot because you know where the limitations are, and you test the electric fence like the T-Rex in Jurassic Park. Like that's what you're doing. You're testing the fence. And as a showrunner, like on Transplant or other things, I want writers to test the fence. Like I want them to say, can we do this? And I get to say, no, it's not the show. But you want them to kind of bring you those things that help you redefine the show, keep it interesting. You just don't want them to, get all angry and threaten to quit if you say no.
Right. You need someone to kind of almost challenge how you look at the show, because you still have to think about it a little bit to recognize it's not the show. You're like, it's not the show, but it makes me think of this or this.
Yeah. You want to be pushed. Like, I mean, in any creative endeavor, you want to be pushed. You want to be good is the enemy of great. You don't want to surround yourself with you want to be challenged. It's like the audience. You need the audience. If you don't have the audience to not laugh when it's not funny, it's going to be mediocre. So you want that, but then you also need to know network TV is such a beast because it is one thing. Like if it ceases to be the one thing that it is, then it's not the show anymore. So you kind of need to keep it, they say, it's true. It's a cliche, but it's true. You need to keep retelling the pilot. You need to find interesting ways of retelling the pilot. But as soon as you stop doing that, you've stopped making the show. You made another show. And that's when you probably lose the audience, because you just do, unless, it's different on cable, but on the network side, you want to keep making the same show. So
the thing that I always sort of fascinated about when talking to people who run shows is they don't necessarily tell you, almost never, to your point on cable, hey, this is 13 episodes and the last 13 is going to be the last one. So tell a whole story that ends at episode 13.
Yeah.
So you have to have a plot that's ongoing and is engaging without being resolved. And you don't quite know when it's going to be, but in your mind, I'm sure you know how it sort of will be at some point if you get to. And that's going to be hard. I mean, when I think of creating anything, writing a song or writing a joke or anything without knowing when you can end it.
Yeah. One thing I've learned about this business is that you need to be able to exist in instability and insecurity. Like if you need answers all the time, you're going to go crazy. And so it's like, and that's like permeates every side of it. Like you don't know whether what you're doing is good, even though you have 7 network executives telling you that it is or that it isn't. You don't know that either of those two things are true, and you have to kind of exist in that reality. And in terms of what you're talking about, absolutely. Like you shape, I think what we always try to do is we try to tell a story in the season, depending on how big the project is from a serialized perspective. Sometimes you're really serialized and it's a big story. Sometimes you're only a little bit and it's small, but either way, you tell that story, you have it end, but a good ending is always a good beginning. And we all think that if we make the ending good enough and that it's just exciting enough, then they have to renew the show. So it's that and that's not true, because it only has to do with the audience, and so, but that's, you just trick yourself into like, we're setting something up here, so, and then you live with it when it ends prematurely.
Yeah. And you're like, that's where it was supposed to end.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think of one of the shows that there was a comedy show here that Alan Spencer did called Sledgehammer, which I don't know if it got.
I don't remember that show. But yeah.
It was basically a Dirty Harry kind of parody meets like Police Squad. And he was 100% certain the show was getting canceled. So on the last episode, it was about Sledgehammer trying to defuse an A-bomb in LA, and he doesn't. And it blows up. That's the last scene, is this mushroom cloud. And then the network had a show fall through, and they're like, oh, here's your season 2. And so so what he did was he just changed the title of the show to Sledgehammer: The Early Years.
Oh, that's amazing.
But it's like, yeah, you can't. Even when you think you're like, all right, it's over. I know I have the ending, so I can do this. And then they throw you for a loop. So it's, you can't even plan for that.
That's amazing. That's I like the way Archer keeps reframing what this show is about. And
yeah.
I read that I read somewhere somebody saying that Brooklyn Nine-Nine should start up and they should just be in an insurance agency or something. And nobody should ever mention any of it. But like they shouldn't even comment on how there's not pop anymore.
Because it's like an anthology now, but with the same characters.
Exactly.
Because I think of like Doctor Who, which I really enjoyed. And I was, loved it when I was a kid. But one of the reasons I checked out of that show was literally every season, they're like uncreating and recreating the universe. Like the stakes are the highest possible stakes every season, and you get like fatigued.
Yeah.
So it must be hard to like, you got to find that balance of it's not, the stakes aren't so high that that's it.
Yeah. Yeah. When we get there, we're done. We're done.
Yeah. Like what else can you do after that?
Yeah.
We literally created the universe over again.
Yeah. It's crazy because in telling those kinds of stories, you want to break everything and then put it back together again. And then when you start up again, you've got to break it all again. And so how do you manage to re-break the same human, and have that continue to be interesting, or have the audience feel threatened, like that you're not going to put them back together again? Because everybody likes to think they'll say, well, they'd never kill him or whatever, and when you know that, when you're thinking this stuff up, you're also the audience because you've seen a million things and you know that they think that, and it's challenging. But I think people, what they just do is they just make a decision and go with it and hope that it works out.
I mean, ER was always killing characters, and you're like, wait, what?
Yeah. You have to actually do the thing where you kill somebody early and intensely, and that way, that's that HBO model of like kill somebody in episode 4, so they know that anything could happen, and then they'll be prepared for it.
See, I think less HBO and more prison rules. You got to kill someone right away. So
fight with the biggest guy.
Yeah. They know you're not messing around, and then you're okay. After that, were you with a background in law prior to doing this? Were you ever drawn to doing legal dramas, or did you watch them?
Yeah, I do, and I've done a Canadian one which I loved, and when I was in law school, I was obsessed with Law and Order, and I actually love them a lot. I think right now that The Good Fight is about the best show ever on.
Good Wife was so good too. Like it's just
yeah. But I kind of like I watched The Good Fight and I can't believe that they managed to sneak away from the law entirely while still having it feel like a legal drama.
Yeah.
So in a sense, I think it's just a really great. And so I will certainly do it again. And I did a Canadian legal drama for 3 years, it's called This Is Wonderland. You can find it. And it's a drama set in what we call provincial courts. But the way to think about it, picture Night Court as an hour long and a drama.
Okay.
So it's all it's actually pretty novel. Like it's all guilty pleas, bail hearings, and plea deals. There's no 9-part trial. It's like little, almost little, like we would do 11 stories in an episode. And it was, it's actually All Rise, which is created by a Canadian CB show. And he was an actor on that show.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. An episodic actor, but I feel like there's a continuum, in some sense.
Oh, I'd love to check that out. That sounds amazing. That's a uniquely Canadian thing too. That's another thing that I picked up on in Transplant is there are things and plot points that you can only have because of the setting of the show. Like somebody speaking French to see if someone speaks French, with the episode with the amnesia. And I was impressed that NBC was like, Americans will get it.
Yeah.
Normally they're not.
Yeah. I think that NBC was impressive about that. And they were also impressive with the Arabic because there's a pretty decent amount of Arabic in the show where the main character is just speaking in his first language to his sister. And they never once said, hey guys, maybe our audience is going to be afraid of this. They never once said that. And they never once balked at it at all. And I actually think that if we made the show 10 years ago, it would be different. But right now, how many people around the world watch Dark, a German language film? Like there's just this whole television show, there's just this whole acceptance to everybody is more open to the universality of the specific. And I think we're like, that's great. That's a bit of a renaissance. We're all leaning into that. So yeah, they were cool with weird French Canadian eccentricities. Yeah.
But also I love the idea, and this is something that's fascinated me forever, is that somebody could be so accomplished in their home country and people treat them like garbage when they move to another country. And weirdly, one of the reason I sort of became obsessed with that was because of Donnie Yen, who is from Boston and grew up here, and pre-Star Wars was literally the biggest movie star in the world everywhere but here. So you would see him on the train sometimes going to see his mother, where I'm like, if he's in China, he needs like a motorcade. And nobody knows, they're probably like, oh, this is a dumb guy. And that's fascinating. I actually used to do a bit about it on stage till people got mad at me here. Because Boston is about 60% man-made.
Right.
So when we got all the Irish immigrants, there was no room, and they literally exploded a mountain and filled in the ocean. So these people had somewhere to go. And then my joke was always that the descendants of those people would get into an Uber, and the guy's like, I was a doctor in Rwanda and I flee, and they'd be like, yeah, shut up. Like they just fill in the ocean for me and my family. And so that this captures that sort of perfectly, where we dismiss people who are from another country as all sort of peasants isn't the right word, but like uneducated or low class or. Yeah.
Well, I was doing some reading before, I was developing the show about, it's like if you've gone to medical school anywhere but Canada or the US and you want to do your residency in Canada, you pretty much can't. Like it's really exclusive, and career doctors who need to come here because of whatever is going on in their country can't, like, if they get to qualify, they have to start from the beginning, which is humiliating, to be like a 10-year professional and then have to go back with a bunch of kids essentially to start again. Or to do it, they have to be dispatched to some like remote sort of village in the Northwest Territories for a year or something. So it's really hard
exposure.
Yeah. So it's a reality, and they all, many people go through it. And so it's a very, it's an emotional thing to sort of that's that in somebody's story in a medical drama. And I think what the interesting thing about it is, even if you haven't experienced that personally, we all know what it's like to be told no, no matter what we do for a living, no matter what. And we all kind of know that heartbreak of, I have to redefine myself now. I can't do the thing I wanted to do. And to have that permeate the story, I think, is what gives the show some heart and gives it a kind of longevity beyond just a few hours, I think. And you can kind of tell that's a version of the story on transplant that we can kind of keep telling and retelling, especially in a medical drama when, every week somebody comes in and they think they're dying and they're convinced they're dying, and then they get to be saved, and then they leave the hospital thinking, man, I get to start my life over. It's kind of the same thematic story, so it's fertile for that reason.
Have you found yourself looking through like medical dictionaries, just finding new diseases to write about?
Yeah, the writers, we had like these like cards of, somebody brought in at one point, like, do I have this disease? And it's all like flesh-eating disease, or if my fingernails are green, I'm going to die in 5 minutes or whatever. So you spent a long time convinced you're symptomatic of all of it. Yeah.
This whole writer's room keeps showing up at the ER every 2 weeks.
We had a doctor, we had like a bunch of doctor consultants, and they did spend a decent amount of their time treating people on set.
They're all psychiatrists.
Yeah.
Well, if I can make a request, if you ever run out of diseases, I recommend maple syrup urine disease, which is a real thing.
Is it?
Yeah. I've worked in healthcare forever, and I've had to look at like the coding on things, on claims.
So was that like you drank too much maple syrup?
No, it's so much worse. It's a blood sugar disease that causes somebody's urine to have the consistency and smell of maple syrup.
Oh my God.
Which you would think they'd come up with something a little more scientific.
Whenever you ask those stories there's so many stories like that in an emergency department. So when the nurses or the doctors or the EMTs, they'll all want to pitch stories, and it's always some version of like an insertion. It's always an insertion, or like what this guy pooped out.
You're never going to believe what we found.
Yeah.
And you're like, that's a funny story, but that's not really an hour drama.
Exactly.
They're all waiting to see what it is. It's like,
Exactly.
Yeah, it's well, I'm sure it's just like being a comic where they're like, oh, let me tell you something. You use this in your skit.
Yeah.
It's great. Is there a show either like you watched growing up or now that you would love to be able to write an episode for if you could?
I'm going to say Cheers because I don't consider I'm not a comedian, and I wouldn't consider myself a sitcom writer, but I love that show. And I think about that show as a writer because every episode was like a little 30-minute stage play, and it was hilarious, but it just feels like those characters were so well defined, and I don't know, it would just be so great. That's it, just the bar and that world, and I think it could. I've never tried. I guess there would be no point, but that's one.
Hey, animation is going to be big coming up because of the lockdown, so you never know. And as a Boston person, I have to encourage more Cheers always. I used to go to the original Cheers when I was a kid with my uncle, and when I was very little, and I'd be like, is Norm here? Like, is Sam working today? And my uncle would always have to be like, nah, they're off today. Because it's the same bar, which is really weird.
Is the same bar on the outside still, or is it
still? So it was originally called the Bullfinch Pub, which they've since changed it to be called Cheers. But the creators of the show bought the rights to use the layout of the bar. Okay. For like $1. So the set of Cheers, the show, looks identical to this bar. And, grew up in Boston where, aside from Spencer for Hire, we weren't really shooting a lot of stuff and felt a million miles away. It was so bizarre to be able to walk into what is essentially the set of a TV show you watch every week. Except it's not. It was very, very odd. Did you grow up in Toronto?
I'm actually from Winnipeg.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, which is the city, it's a small city, it's middle of Canada, and yeah.
Because a lot of stuff's set in Toronto, like I think of like King of Kensington or like some of the shows.
A lot of Canadian stuff is set in Toronto. Yeah, because, just from if you're going to do like a procedural, there's the most action here. It's
like the New York.
It's the New York, yeah. So we set things on the West Coast in Vancouver or in Toronto. Although I've worked on Canadian shows that have been set in Montreal, and I worked on one that was set in St. John's, Newfoundland, and different places.
Was there a show that you watched as a kid that like you thought Toronto would be like, and then when you moved there, you were like, oh no, it's not like this? Because I have a ton for New York, so I'm always like, is that true in other countries?
Actually, when I was a kid, I was only watching American shows.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So was there a show that you thought New York would be like when you first went to New York?
It was, I guess. I would go to New York a lot, so I have to, I think New York is the show, like New York is the city out of all of the fiction that you watch when you're growing up that just, not specifically to answer that question, but like certainly you form an idea of New York in your mind, when you're growing up and when you're watching everything that's set there, and it's got a very kind of like romantic ideation for everybody, whether you're watching Taxi Driver or whether, still there's something
Sex in the City, same city,
there's something about it. For me, it was the Woody Allen movies, it was the New York of Annie Hall or of Manhattan, or it was that kind of New York.
Upper West Side kind of New York of, yeah. I mean, for me, weirdly, and you mentioned earlier, it was Night Court. I was just like, New York's Night Court, obviously. That's New York. What? Or like the opening credits to Saturday Night Live. Like, they got it. Boom. That's it. Some of it's like the Warriors too, but it's mostly like those.
I wonder if I have not gone back and looked at Night Court. I think it secretly might be pretty good. So
it is. I'm a huge Barney Miller fan, which I don't know if you ever got into Barney Miller, but and much like X-Files begatting the writers, Barney Miller, Reinhold Weege, who created Night Court, worked on Barney Miller, and he was sort of under Danny Arnold. So there's a lot of Barney Miller DNA in Night Court. It's like a sillier Barney Miller. And the parts of it that really hold up are the parts that it sort of shares with Barney Miller. And it's still really funny and weird. And it does that thing that sitcoms do when they go for more than 4 seasons where they get real crazy and bizarre. Like there's one episode, I think in season 7, where it's one of those episodes where they're like, we got to get these 200 cases done by midnight or something, it's like, so they could just run through joke. Yeah. And as a kid, I'm watching it and it's the camera's on Harry and he's yelling at these 2 defendants. He's like, you are harassing this guy. You got to leave him alone. You just don't stop. It's too much. And if you do it again, I'm going to throw you in jail. And then the camera cuts to who the people he's yelling at are. And it's literally an animated Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner. And that's the joke. And as a kid, I was like, how? Because it's a Warner Brothers show, so they could do it. But that kind of stuff, you're like, all right, you wouldn't have tried that in season 3.
Yeah. That's very meta. That's hilarious. That's great.
Yeah. So I would recommend rewatching it for the. Do I hear children? Did you have children?
Yeah.
Have you tried to make them that sounded really creepy. I was like, do I hear children? But I asked because have you ever tried to make them watch anything you watched growing up? Like, you're going to love this. And then. Yeah.
So we're going through this thing with The Simpsons where I talked large about how much they're going to love The Simpsons. And then we can't get through an episode of The Simpsons. And I've been curating good episodes of The Simpsons. And they don't care, so I find it very, very upsetting. There's no reason for them to not care. There's no way, Marge becomes a gambling addict is not funny. There's no way.
It's monorail, guys.
I tried that one. And they were kind of like meh, so I don't get it.
One of my good friends is Dana Gould, who wrote for The Simpsons forever. And his daughters were not interested in The Simpsons. And one of his daughters got into The Simpsons only because she got really into Bob's Burgers. And then Netflix recommended The Simpsons. So she's like, I guess. He's like, I couldn't get her to watch this. And then now she's like, yeah, it's pretty good.
They took to Central Park.
Oh.
Not a show I grew up watching, but speaking of Bob's Burgers, I don't know.
Yeah, it's weird when I don't have children, but I imagine I'd be like, I got to program them right.
Yeah.
Got to give them good taste.
Yeah.
And it must be frustrating because of course they're going to have their own taste. They're not going to.
Yeah, you can't make them like the stuff that you like. And what can I do? I wait for them to come around. I predict that they will find it.
When I was growing up, at least, I would watch my parents watch shows to learn what made them laugh or what made them emote and then figure out how that works. And I don't know if kids still do that.
I know, because it's so, I feel like they do less so because it's rare that we have co-viewing. They have so many, when I was a kid, there weren't a lot of options, but I totally empathize what you just said. I remember I would watch Star Trek with my dad because he liked it. I would watch this show called Bizarre, which is a Canadian. Yeah.
It's like a sketch show, right? What was the main guy's name?
John Viner.
Yes.
And I'm pretty sure Bob Einstein was on as Super Dave. He started there. And my dad would laugh. I was too young to get any of it, but he would laugh. And then I would see Super Dave over the years and make that connection, But,
Bizarre had a weird history here. They did 2 versions of it. There was a dirty version and a clean version.
Okay.
So there were some sketches with nudity. And so some episodes aired in syndication here, just in local markets. And then Showtime would air some. And it would be the same sketches, but this woman's topless for no reason. And I remember as a kid, I'd be like, wow, huh? It was very, very strange. That's my full experience with Bizarre. But I first saw Super Dave there as well. Yeah. But you try to reverse engineer what the adult likes.
Yeah, and you can't. And then I guess at some point you are drawn to things because of a nostalgic factor. vis-a-vis your parents. So certainly whenever the original Star Trek comes on, I'll watch it because of my dad, for sure.
Are you a Star Trek guy generally now? Like, because like in this TV guide, Deep Space Nine, all over it.
Yeah, I was going to actually say that. I was a Next Generation guy in a really, really big way. And I didn't get into Deep Space Nine, and I mean to watch Picard, but I haven't yet. And it really sort of, for me, it was Next Generation kind of the beginning and the end.
That's something I hear from so many people who didn't watch any other Star Treks. And for whatever reason, Next Generation just captured like just this expanse of people.
It's a brilliant show. I mean, it just individual episodes are brilliant and characters are great. It's a great show. And yeah, I don't know why. I'm sure other ones are great too, you know.
When you're doing a show, have you shot the whole season of Transplant?
Yes, shot the whole season. It's shot in full, and it has been finished since the late spring.
Okay, so you got it like just in under the wire.
Yeah, we were totally lucky. Yeah.
So is it just like a weird, frustrating thing where you're like, you know, like you said, you're sort of trapped in Canada right now while the show's premiering, and you're like, oh, to get out there, my baby's going to college. It must be just bizarre.
It's really bizarre. I mean, it's really bizarre to sit on a Zoom screen and kind of watch all this stuff happen. I don't know what to say. I mean, we'd be doing, we'd certainly be elsewhere right now promoting it, but hey man, it's the world we live in. And, I think like everything, you know, we probably don't need to be physically elsewhere. Yeah. And we can be safe, but, it is weird. It is weird to watch it. Yeah.
Does it make you think, like, obviously you don't know if you get a second season this early in the game, but you probably still have to think ahead. Do you think, well, if things don't change, how would we do that? Like, how would we shoot it? Would I create the stories differently based on the status of the world?
So I think that with us, timeline, we're clearly set in 2019. I mean, clearly to me, maybe not to the audience, but I think we can continue from where it ended and not have to deal with it. And we talked about this a lot as we've kind of been developing the second season, and we think that everybody's lived with the pandemic for such a long time that we don't really need to see it thrown back at us on screen. It's enough already. You know? Yeah,
I'm fascinated with how you hinted that, because like sometimes I'll be watching a show and I'll see like a scene where everybody's crowded in a place, and I'll be like, ah!
Yeah. So absolutely. I'm having the same reaction. I just watched, somebody told me, and I did, to watch Homecoming season 2, and I watched and I liked it, but I couldn't believe all the crowd scenes, and it was like, your reaction, you know?
Yeah. You're like, what's happening? And it didn't take that long to get there, you know? Yeah. So maybe that means it won't take that long to unlearn it as well.
Although that's something I noticed in the TV guide, is that it's very white, you know?
Oh, yeah.
Like, yeah.
I mean, America in 1998 was very white. Yeah. There was not a lot of representation. I was talking to someone the other day about, like, I think it was Margaret Cho had a show called All American Girl in 94. That was the first show with an all Asian cast we had. 1994.
It's crazy.
It's insane. I feel like ER probably broke a lot of the barriers too, because that show had a pretty wide integrated cast.
It did. Yeah, I think it was you're right. And I'm sure, you know, we said in developing Transplant that if you go into an emergency room, they're unbelievably diverse places, not the patients, the doctors. The doctors are all from everywhere, you know, and it probably was like that in the 90s when they made that show for that reason. And of course, Grey's was really deliberately diverse as well in smart ways.
I wonder if it's easier to present that to a network or to people because they're not that people have like an inherent racism, although some people do, that's a whole other conversation, but where you're like, oh, they're all have a skill set and they're good at their job. So it's easier to sort of present a diverse group that way because they all do the same thing and they're at a higher level of skill than, you know, if you were doing a show about a restaurant or something else. I don't know.
I think now there's a recognition that for too long it just was everybody was white for some reason, and now the question is always, well, how now it's always baked in. And it's great, and it's the way it should be. But the diversity now is always inherently baked in.
Yeah, it's more reflective of actual life.
Yeah, totally. I showed one of my kids the Lord of the Rings trilogy this summer, and she said, "Why is everybody white?" Like, which is I thought in the context of that, it was a really interesting question because, Middle Earth feels very like like Britain essentially in the Middle Ages, which probably was a white place. But why did they cast that movie with only white people? It doesn't there's no reason. It's fantasy, we talked about how it's ridiculous. I mean, it should have been completely different.
Have you seen the new Armando Iannucci version of,
Copperfield
it's a completely diverse cast. And I was listening to it the other day and he said, well, in Britain, we have all these amazing actors of all different ethnicities and they don't get to be in any period dramas. Why? Basically, like, who cares? Like,
it doesn't make any sense.
No.
It's like for the longest time, that was the rule, but the rule makes no sense. So it's that one thing where as soon as you realize it doesn't make any sense, why would anybody ever do it again?
Yeah, and I imagine no one's complaining even. Like, even the people I think would complain are not like, wait a minute, why is not everyone's not the same race on this show? What, it's, don't care. You don't need it. It's whoever's best for the role and makes sense in the show.
Well, that's another answer I have to your dream writing question is Veep.
Veep, that'd be a tough one to write.
Yeah, but it's just, if you have aggression,
yeah,
I don't have aggression, but if you want to write insults, I think that show and I guess Succession, which is a child of Veep in a way, have the level of venality on those shows is pretty remarkable.
Did you watch the original, the Armando Iannucci one, Thick of It?
Yeah.
God.
Peter Capaldi.
Oh, yeah. Man. And then when they bring that other Scottish guy in, Jamie, who's like the Uber Capaldi, and they're like, oh, no.
Yeah.
Oh, the insults are amazing. Yeah, just being in a writer's room coming up with insults has to be a good time. And cathartic.
They probably do it on set, I'm guessing. Like, they probably stand around and just try things, I'm guessing.
Iannucci said that everything was written because that show weirdly feels so improv.
Yes.
And I don't know if they do it on Veep, but they wrote everything on that.
Wow.
Which, is crazy. Like, I'm thinking, like, I've been to sitcom tapings and they're like, try this joke, try this, swap out this. But yeah, it apparently not on that, which is so much more impressive. Well, thank you so much for doing this. It's been great talking to you. And I do really enjoy the show. And next week's episode might be my favorite one, episode 3.
Oh, cool.
Of the 3, because I'm all about frat boys and anti-vaxxers getting what's coming to them.
Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it. It's a fun format, and it was great talking to you.
There you go. That's Joseph K. Continuing my string of Canadians that I've had on the show since lockdown. I think this is the 3rd one that we've crossed international lines up north to Canada. What a great guy. Super smart. Had a great time talking to him. Very fun. And as I said, Transplant is really, really engaging and a good show, so you should check it out on NBC. I know I will be watching. I am hooked at this point. If you're hooked on this show, you can listen each and every week where we have a brand new episode, sometimes 2 of the show, and they come out every week. I haven't missed an episode yet. And as I said, some weeks we get 2 episodes. You probably got this episode early too. If you're a Patreon, you can go, or a patron. You're not a Patreon. You're not the whole site. But if you're a patron, you can go to patreon.com/TV Guidance Counselor and you can pledge $1 a month, $100 million a month, whatever you like. And it is a huge help to the show. I basically break even on the show. But if you don't have any money, times are tough. I know. I understand too. I just like that you enjoy the show and that you tell other people about the show. It is very much appreciated. You can email me at tvguidancecounselor@gmail.com or at kennethicanread.com, or you can contact me on social media at Kenneth W. Reed or at TV Guidance with any questions or comments you might have or guest requests. As I said, I am seriously taking every guest request you have and trying to get them all on the show. So if you have any more people you'd like to hear again, I will do my best to get them on. So that's it for this week again, and we'll see you next week for a brand new edition of TV Guidance Counselor.
Television.
actually the premise of it is essentially the plot of Major League.